excited because Carolyn is with me again. This is her second time on CDR Live with us. And that was about 2 years ago or so when you were with us previously. And that was before she actually launched her book, Gourmet Leadership, which is now a bestseller. So we're going to be talking all about gourmet leadership. And first, just welcome, Carolyn. So happy to have you back with me.
Thank you, Nancy. It's wonderful to be back. I appreciate it so much. And we always have wonderful conversations. So looking forward to this one. You're such an expert on leadership, and I appreciate that so much.
You as well. I really appreciate you. And, you know, I've actually known Carolyn for more than 10 years. I was thinking about it. And you were certified in our assessments back when we were still in Tulsa.
Yes, in Tulsa.
So, and we've been in the Houston area for almost 10 years now.
Wow.
So it's like 9+, so close to 10 years. So anyway, and we've had a great relationship. We just appreciate the work you do as an independent coach and running your own business and having so many coaches that you work with. And frankly, she's been kind enough to refer coaches to us as well. So thank you. But we are here today. I want to give you a little bit more background first on Carolyn, if that's okay, Carolyn.
Sure.
And so there's things you just need to know about her. She is top of game, top of the field in executive and leadership development. And actually, before she went into her current life of coaching and executive development with the Maue company, which she's had for 20 years, Maue Center, she was actually a VP of culture with UMPC, and that's Pittsburgh Medical Center. And she also led EAP programs there as well. And then she worked as an executive in a couple of other firms, then out on her own. So she's got a wealth of experience and does just great work. Now, today, she collaborates with bright leaders to transform their teams and industries through innovation and inspiring leadership. And she has it all driven by the mission to change the world one leader at a time. So I love that. That's the only way to get it done, right? I mean, it's just perfect. And she is an expert in dealing with the people side of the business and people issues. And she focuses on foundational ingredients, which I love the ingredients, to truly excellent leadership, which she calls gourmet leadership. And in fact, she has her leadership coaching book is called, and it's a bestseller called Gourmet Leadership. She says, turn up the heat of your secret sauce. It's an online course and other programs that she's going to talk about today. So anyway, I am thrilled and delighted to have Carolyn with me today. Welcome. So what can you add that I missed? I'm sure I missed, something a lot in your bio.
Oh, well, we have, lots to talk about, but yes, the book was launched in early 2022, and that's been really exciting and fun. We had a wonderful launch with about 150 people attended and online, and the book is a great tool for the leaders that I work with in coaching, who oftentimes are very high level, have a lot of responsibility. But the book is always also really good for people that are emerging leaders and new leaders. And so we can talk about that a bit more, but it's been really fun to get that off the ground and out into the world. And it's added to use a metaphor, a zest to the business and to my coaching, which has been lots of fun.
Great. And I know we talked for years. You were working on it and coming up with it. And I'm so glad you finally got it done. And it's a huge success, which I knew it would be. So congratulations. So happy for you. So one thing, though, that intrigues me, I love the language. Well, I love that you are using the gourmet leadership in line with gourmet chefs and others. And that's kind of your theme throughout. So tell me, what is the secret sauce? What is the secret sauce to leadership or to people that you coach? What is that?
Secret sauce refers to the experiences and talents and lens that each leader brings uniquely to their leadership. And so these days it's so important to be bringing whatever tools you can in your toolbox to retain, develop, engage your team members and your staff
Right.
And I think things have shifted over the years in terms of what generations are coming into the workforce and what they expect. And they want to get to know their leaders. They want to know more about them. They want to know how they balance work and family. They want to know their experiences and how they made it through hardships. And so I think secret sauce can be that particular essence or uniqueness that brings a vitality and a difference and a zest, whether that be your interest in sports or your interest in cooking and baking, whether, people come into their office and they can smell the chocolate chip cookies that you baked the night before, or that you always have wonderful music playing, or the latest band, or that you're involved with certain community groups and causes. And I think that really rounds out a leader. We also, in the book, we talk about the ingredients that each leader has to have to be expert at what they do. But the secret sauce brings this sort of additional essence to leadership that I think is really important in this day and age.
Great. And I guess to me, it sounds like too, it just helps them build better relationships. When you can be more human and share more about yourself, it puts the employees at ease. It kind of builds that trust that
I was talking to a coach, another coach that was telling me that she was working with a senior leader in healthcare.
Right.
And he was really busy and really getting kind of overwhelmed with a lot of conflicts that were happening. And what was happening in the moment was that he was sort of freezing up and he didn't know what to say. And he was feeling overwhelmed in the moment. And then people felt like he was, to use your words, detaching, right?
Right.
And so she said, tell me how he could use his secret sauce in that moment, because I feel like he needs some kind of model in that moment. And I said, well, what are his interests? And she said, well, he's a long distance runner. I said, well, there you go. I said, what can he do to prepare ahead of time? What, when he's going up a hill and he's running out of breath, what does he do? How can you take that metaphor of running and bring it to this situation? And she did. And she said it was really, really successful. He really.
Oh, good. Yeah. That's great. I mean, in terms of transferring it to something he has passion about and is successful with.
Right? And that you can remember a metaphor that you can remember. Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's great. That's great. So then you also mentioned, and I agree, that secret sauce kind of sets the person apart, makes them human, makes them relatable. So I think it's great. And then there's other ingredients that you mentioned for success. So what I'll let you talk about, what are some of those ingredients that will help leaders be more successful?
Well, my experience in working with leaders over a long period of time, as you talked earlier, I've been in the field over 30 years, and I've been coaching about 13. And what I have found is that because in our country, we don't have a standard way of preparing leaders for those responsibilities, that oftentimes when I'm working with leaders, I find that their leadership skills kind of like Swiss cheese. They're really good at some things, and then they have these really big holes, right? And one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book was that I think that those leadership skills can be labeled and defined and built, and so I call them ingredients, but having a vision and knowing what your own vision is for your work and your company and your organization, and then being able to transcribe that vision into a larger vision with your team, I think is really fundamental. Another one that you and I work a lot on together is strengths, knowing your own strengths, how to describe them to other people, how to use them often, and then what are your strategies for bringing the strengths out in others. Because we know that people that use their strengths often are people that are most contented and oftentimes the most successful. And then what about giving and getting feedback. That's so important especially in this day and age with hybrid working environment,
Right.
with the fast pace, with all the technology that we're using. How do you give constructive feedback, and how do you receive feedback? And then another chapter I called the sous chef to executive chef. And that's really all about managing your time and your energy and your priorities as you move into a leadership role. And that doesn't mean that you give up, you're not a working manager. Everybody's a working manager, right? But when you
Right.
go into a leadership role and you're responsible for a different set of responsibilities, it can be very difficult to make that shift into, really meaningful work that is not necessarily going to be real satisfying in the moment, but that
Right.
you have to take the long view. And then another chapter I talk about is the right cookware, which is building a great team, and using the elements of great teams, establishing trust and resolving conflict, right, and getting commitment from each team member. And then one of my favorite chapters is Hot Tamales, which is
I love that.
which is resolving conflict and working with difficult people. And so many times leaders shy away from conflict. It's for many people, they pull back instead of moving toward it. And so that chapter gives a lot of suggestions on how to manage conflict. And then the final chapter, or the final ingredient, is the pièce de résistance, which is having a leadership presence. Okay. Because we know that leaders need to use their role appropriately and their authority appropriately, but then also blend in that secret sauce in these ingredients. And I talk in the book about how when you're a little kid and the principal walks down the hall, everybody knows who the principal is, right? Well, when you're a leader, it's the same thing. I mean, people have an expectation of you, and so making sure that you have the right countenance and the right presence and the right posture, and your external matches your internal. That's really important too. So those are the major ingredients. I know there are many, many leadership ingredients and fundamentals, but those are the ones that I work the most with my leaders.
Great. It's funny too, when you talk about executive presence, and obviously you use our assessments and with different executives and so forth. But one area that I've been seeing more frequently involving executive presence and problems with it are people who have risks as eccentric, that they have, because they can maybe not connect socially real well. They've got busy brains. They march to their own beat. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and they also just kind of are in their own world. Mm-hmm. So they may dress and look or talk a little unusually. Mm-hmm. So do you run into that too, where you have some, and they're often the really creative people. They're just super creative, but they march to their own beat.
Yes.
What suggestions do you have for leaders or aspiring leaders who may have that to connect with what's the importance of their role and how can they build on their executive presence?
I think that's a really great question. And I do see it too. And I think that, as a society, we've become more accepting of a wider range of dress and countenance, I guess you could call it. In fact, when I was at an executive leadership meeting presenting on the book and Secret Sauce, and one of the women in the audience said, I started out in the 60s working in the financial world, and the degree of my secret sauce was whether I could wear a black suit or a blue suit to work. And, it used to be that way, right? That people were very, very, very limited. And now there's a much broader array, which for people that are eccentric, like you're describing, that doesn't really help, because sometimes they don't recognize that either their external is distracting from their credibility, or another thing I talk about in the chapter is that sometimes there's a dissonance between what the person is responsible for, what they're talking about, and the way that they look right? And
Yeah.
so that issue of distraction and also of dissonance, I think is a really good way to frame the issue of leadership presence. It's not that we want everybody to look the same or anything like that. It's just you want it to be aligned. And one of the things that I've suggested to people who have struggled with this a bit is that I encourage them to get external help. Right.
Yes, I do too. To get a wardrobe person,
a hair. In fact, I've taken people to the hairdresser. I have, and I've taken people to get new glasses, honestly, because some, and then I have a couple of wardrobe people that I recommend, because it's hard to know what to wear, and it's hard to get, so much of what we do is habit.
Oh yeah, and comfort, and just comfort. This is who we are.
Comfort.
And our idea, I remember years ago, I went to a medical device company in northern New Jersey, and I was coming from Tulsa as a consultant, and I wore a dress that was watercolor, dark watercolors, but nonetheless, and open-toed heels. And so I get there, and the vice president of leadership says, "Oh, I see you're dressed casually today." Oh, and I have to confess, I have some eccentric. So after that experience, I double check, even me, I double check. Is this going to match the culture enough? Am I in step with that industry? And I can look at their data too. So I have a better idea of whether they're really buttoned down or they're going to be a little more, relaxed and artful, if you will.
Yes. Yes.
But, as a consultant, that matters too, right? The
absolutely
fitting in where you're not, making others uncomfortable.
Right. And sometimes you just don't know. And so it's sometimes it's better to go, a little bit more conservative than,
right.
But yeah, it's a challenge. And it's also a challenge because oftentimes people are very sensitive about it. And it's actually one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons I wanted to put it in the book, because I wanted to normalize it and to say, we all are concerned about this. We all think about it, and burying it and pretending that it's not important is not. It's like a conflict. Like it's not in the long run. It's not going to be helpful. So you might as well look at it, make some decisions about it. One of the stories I tell in the book is. I went to hear, this was when I was still writing the book, and I went to a presentation it happened to be on Alzheimer's disease. Oh, and my mother was suffering from Alzheimer's. And so I was very interested in the topic. And this researcher physician had just come back from a wonderful meeting, an international meeting, and he had really exciting information to talk about these new methods and new drugs.
Right.
And so I was sitting there listening to him, and he was standing with a window behind him. And so there was light coming in. And I realized after a little while, even though what he was talking about was so interesting, I was getting distracted, and I was like bored, and I wasn't paying attention. And I realized that every single thing about him was gray.
Oh my!
Like his hair was gray. His glasses were silver. He had a gray suit on. He had a gray tie, and the light was coming in from the back, and that was making him look even more gray. And
oh my!
And that concept of dissonance came to me, which is what he's saying is so exciting and so profound and strong and big and huge, and he was playing it too small, and he was playing it too boringly, right?
And
and instead of him sort of getting out of the way, which I think you could make a case for with some situations, that person needs to get out of the way. What it did, it was so dissonant that it was distracting. And that's when I started to really think even more about the importance of this, because I realized that I see that in other situations as well.
Right. No, I agree. It's and that's where people should be open to, like, if they're going to give a presentation, do a practice, let others review you. And even in your dress, do it as a dress rehearsal.
Right.
Because you get people who talk so that it's, even though you know they're like the best thinker, they're not the best presenter, and they need some support and possibly some training.
Right.
So yeah, you can see that. And I've even had of late where when it comes to that, and then we'll move on the eccentric thing, I've had some younger folks saying, we can be anyone we want to be, and we can present ourselves in any way. And I'm saying, well, yes, you can. But if you're going for a specific job and you're doing sales and say pharmaceutical or something else, you have to dress and show up in a way that is complementary to what the customer is expecting.
That's right. You have to know your audience.
Exactly. And so that total freedom at all times doesn't always cut it in a business environment if you want that type of work.
Right. Exactly.
And if you don't want that kind of work, then that's great. Then go do something in the artsy, more flexible community.
But one of the reasons I included it as a leadership ingredient is I think it's another leadership skill, Nancy. I think it's something that is important, just like resolving conflict, just like having a great team, like knowing how to present yourself in a way that's going to maximize your effectiveness. That's an important skill.
Absolutely. And the thing I think that I love about the book too, is it's not natural for all of us. Many of us stumble and aren't just intuitive about what's the best approach.
Right.
So it does take work, even for executive coaches, depending on the audience. So I think it's so important, because that could be the one thing that holds a leader back.
Absolutely.
Not having the presence.
And I'll tell you what else. I bet you could cite some some examples, and I can too in my work, in my background working in corporations. I think I can name some people I know were passed over for promotion because of this very issue.
Oh, I've seen it. And I've seen it even using the data where the strongest candidate by far was in pharma for a business development position. Strongest by far was bypassed because they said, oh, he doesn't fit well. He doesn't look the part. Mm-hmm. And instead they went to external candidates who did not fit the job. So that's how flawed. And I even said, can't you take him to a wardrobe consultant? I mean, I didn't know what the specific nature of why he didn't fit, but I'm like, get him some help. Get him some help.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does happen. And that's terrible. I want to switch just a little bit though. The other thing that part of your ingredients, I love the creative side, and that really ties to what chefs do. And I saw, when you have even smaller restaurants, how the chefs are able to be more creative. And talk a little bit about that creative side of leadership, which fascinates me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate, you and I, as leadership consultants, talk about embodying the work, right? And when I set out to write this book, I wasn't writing a new leadership canon. I'm not adding to the new information. Most of this is, most people know that these are important skills, but what I did do is bring a new way of talking about it.
Yes.
And a new way of thinking about it, and a way that is fun and that most people can relate to. And so my very message in using the metaphor is that's what you need to bring, right? Everyone has their own individual way of looking at things, and their quirkiness, and their interests. And I believe that's a gift that we should be giving to the world. And some people, that creativity comes out in the amazing scientific discoveries that they're working on, or the new technology that they're developing. And with other people, it's in the arts of some kind, music or the visual arts. Other people are amazing athletes, and they know how to teach other people how to be athletes, but I do believe that we all have the capacity to keep learning the fundamentals and the skills. But then once we get those under our belt, then the real creativity starts. And that's when the magic happens, because we start to bring in new ways of doing things. It's like when we say to our senior leaders, you know, you've got to let your people do what they do on your staff people do, because they probably know how to do the job better than you do now, because they're bringing their own way of doing it, right? And their own skill and their own background.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So one of the things I wanted to make sure I talked to you about and your audience is that I'm doing these things called Gourmet Leadership Dinners, and they are working with chefs, talented chefs in restaurants, and a team comes to dinner with the chef and with me, and the chef has designed the menu, and then the chef comes out and brings out a course, and then I interview the chef on the how the chef came up with those ingredients, and but then I also interview the chef on gourmet leadership, like how he or she leads their team, how they develop their team, how do they resolve conflict, how do they delegate, and so throughout the meal, along with the delicious meal and that experience, we're also reinforcing the concepts of gourmet leadership. So I just did a retreat last week with a team, and then they capped off the evening with a gourmet leadership dinner, and it was magical. It's
great.
It's really wonderful.
No, that's fabulous. And I wonder, just a question as a follow up to that: do you do that for, say, other businesses where you bring in the chef, maybe?
Yes. In fact, I've got a group that in February that we're going to actually bring in the chef to the group. Yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's
yeah.
Great. Yeah. True confession. Many, many years ago in my early life, I worked in a seafood restaurant. But I remember, and our chef was creative, but he was horrible. It was like you ran in and ran out of it. You never wanted to get the wrath of the chef, if that
right.
So many, but that's how, many, and some still are like that, obviously, but sometimes there's creative entrepreneurs, and even some of the research on like technical entrepreneurs can really have abrasive.
Right.
I look at the data and have written a chapter on this too, on the entrepreneurial profile in these like high-tech organizations. And they're abrasive, and they don't have those, people skills. Now, I'm not saying chefs. Hopefully, some of the chefs I know are better than that now.
And they're having to change too, because the generations that are coming into the workforce only have so much tolerance for that, and then they're not staying. They're going to leave, and so the chefs are. But the restaurant industry, I learned this from one of the people that I interviewed. 9 chefs and entrepreneurs for the book. And one of them was Dana Cohen, who had been the chief editor of Food and Wine magazine for many years. And she was awesome. And I actually interviewed her during COVID. And she was telling me about how the model of the restaurant industry absolutely has to change in order for it to be sustainable. Because about something like 80% of restaurants rent their space. And so there's this tenuousness, and then there's, tremendous turnover with staff.
Oh yeah.
And there just needs to be new financial and new leadership models, because she said that whole, temperamental, hot-headed chef model is not going to be sustainable moving forward into the future. Right. And I'm seeing this. One of the things I'm seeing, I don't know if you're seeing it, but I'm seeing restaurants who, first of all, they'll do things like built-in tipping. They'll build that into the price, so the staff gets an automatic wage or a regular wage. And then the other thing I'm seeing a lot of is that they're selling other products. They're developing products in addition to the meal that they have served at the restaurant, so that there's other lines of revenue. And so it's very interesting to watch these shifts going on. But I actually I wanted to tell you, I have a client now who's an entrepreneur and a restaurant owner. And it's my first one that I've actually coached. And he was telling me today about he was having to really push the chef, the executive chef, on consistency of one of the foods. And he said, I think I tasted the French fries 100 times before he got it right. And I said, that's one of the things that is really amazing about restaurants is when you think about it, you go to a restaurant that's a favorite restaurant and you're going to get the same dish that you had last week, maybe a year ago, maybe years ago, and it's going to look and taste exactly the same every time.
Right.
I mean, and then I said, I coach people in higher ed, technology, healthcare. I said, that level of replication perfection, you just don't find that anywhere else. But we expect it in restaurants.
You're right.
And that's what I mean by gourmet leadership, right? That ability to make everything delightful every single time, and all of that, the behind the scenes that's going on to make that happen. That is really exceptional leadership.
Right. And the interesting thing too, and we've worked with some restaurants, some with our assessments and so forth, part of it though, you get a little bit of the maverick, you get that high creative in the chef. So getting that consistency and working with them is something the manager has to do, or it's not going to happen, because they're not naturally inclined. They don't, in fact, they get bored easily, right? So
they want to make something else.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's where the special comes in each week.
Yes,
creative thing.
Right. You have to find that balance, right? Just like we do in every other kind of leadership role.
Exactly.
You have to find that balance.
Exactly. One other thing too, that you have so much in the book. I mean, thank you. That the other thing that I think is a challenge sometimes for leaders, especially when there's a lot of stress or there's conflict, is managing their emotions, managing their temperament. And as you know, in our risks, we have what we call hyper moody. So people and people who are more artistic or more creative often tend to have elevations or risks in that. What suggestions do you have for leaders who can kind of get their temperament, or get, maybe have a short fuse or get moody? What ideas and suggestions do you have?
That's a really good question. What I mentioned the chapter earlier, sous chef to executive chef, that talks about managing time and energy and priorities. And I think that it is some kind of practice around meditation or a gratitude practice. Just reflection. Some people just choose to journal, or when they're walking or working out, they're reflecting on the day, and having some kind of practice that sort of calms the mind. I think is one thing. I also think there's practices that we need to do like every year, and then there's ones we need to do every week, and then there's ones we need to do every day, and then there's ones we need to do in the moment. Right? Every year, it's like you need to take a nice vacation or do something that you love that takes you away. Same way with every month, doing something that fulfills you in some way. I talked about the daily practice, and in the moment, it's learning things like counting to 10, and like knowing that you can step back, that once it gets to a point that you can let go and you've said what you needed to say, and that you need to step back. I also think that that coming back around, and not necessarily always apologizing, but reassuring people that even though you're sorry, even though you lost your temper or things were tense, that you're reassuring them that things are okay and that you appreciate what they're doing. I think is also really, really important.
Good. Yeah, and the other one, and I have to admit that Simon Vetter gave me this one, is 3 deep breaths in the moment, similar to counting to 10. That in that instant. But I think the other thing that is recognizing that you tend to do this.
Yeah, right.
Acknowledging it. Yeah. And then trying to do things to prevent it. I agree, because it can. Once you burn a bridge with a or you frighten your employees or you intimidate them, it's hard to get that back sometimes. Because then
but also I have to tell you, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because my husband Brian sent me an article on charisma in Premier League soccer. And the author talked about positive charisma and negative charisma. Yeah. And there's some coaches that have positive charisma.
Yes.
And there's some coaches that have negative charisma. And there's some politicians that we could name that have some positive
absolutely.
charisma and negative, right? And I told him that I have been thinking about this a lot, because if you talk to people that have worked for a while and they talk about people that have developed them, sometimes it's not always totally positive, right? Sometimes it's like, well, I had a boss who really pushed me.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I get you.
And now losing your temper and, being a prima donna, that doesn't get you anywhere. But I do think that there's different facets to charisma, you know, and that knowing when to shower praise, knowing when to be really cheering the team on, but then also sometimes just knowing when to hold them accountable and to say, exactly. I can't put up with this anymore. This has to change, right? Yeah. And you've got to figure it out. I mean, I always talk about the day that I had a very loud argument with my boss at the time at UPMC, and he was telling me that I had to take my employee assistance program to market, and that I had to market it and sell it. And I didn't know anything about that. And he basically said, well, if you don't want to do it, then I'll get somebody who will. And so it's like, well, okay, I'm a single mom. I better do that. So I figured it out, and I figured it out really fast. And once I figured it out, I realized how much I loved it. And if he hadn't pushed me and said, put up or shut up, I wouldn't have done it. And so I do think that it's also that it's encouragement, but it's also knowing how far to push.
Exactly. Because if you don't push, people aren't going to grow either. They're going to stay in those little comfort zones, like you say.
Yeah.
So I think, but it's still being able to keep a relationship intact,
that's
as you do it. It may feel off for a while, but that it's not completely shattered, where you're still showing respect for your people. But yet,
and it's when a person loses control of their emotions in the moment that it's just not useful. So it's it's being responsible for managing yourself, right? And and knowing how hard to push, or knowing when to pull back, or knowing when to reward, but no one has the right really to totally lose it and not take responsibility for it. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So how has the book made a difference for you in your coaching practice and leadership executive development? What has it meant to you?
That's a really good question. Well, I think I mentioned this word earlier, but it's brought a zest. Like, of people have responded so positively to the metaphor and to the book and to and I see people learning from it, and that's really rewarding. And then I've been able to create these other offshoot products as a result of it too. I turned the content of the book into an online class, so people can take a self-guided class on gourmet leadership. It's 5 hours of they